The Vrixx considered themselves the pinnacle of cooperative evolution. 7 million years of telepathic hivemind development had granted them mastery over biological networking that made quantum computers look like abacuses operated by concussed squirrels. Their bioluminescent carapaces pulsed with synchronized thought patterns, creating light shows that could communicate entire dissertations in the time it took lesser species to say hello. They'd mapped 17,000 star systems, established trade routes across 4 galactic arms, and published peer-reviewed papers on the philosophical implications of existing in multiple thought streams simultaneously. Naturally, they were completely unprepared for Kethan. The planet hung in space like an emerald nightmare, its surface shrouded in perpetual mist that sensor arrays described with terms like aggressively hostile and inadvisable for carbon-based life forms. Class-VII Death World, the designation read. The galactic catalogue listed Kethan alongside planets where it rained molten glass and moons where the atmosphere was composed primarily of weaponized spite. The Vrixx expedition needed mineral samples from Kethan's unique crystalline deposits, samples worth enough credits to fund a small moon colony. The expedition leader, a Vrixx named Zelthrim whose bioluminescence flickered in shades of pompous violet, had assembled what he called the finest survival technology available to civilized space. Force field generators capable of repelling Category 5 megafauna. Atmospheric processors that could filter toxins down to the molecular level. Neural dampeners to prevent psychic predators from turning brains into scrambled eggs. Gravitational anchors. Thermal regulators. A mobile laboratory that cost more than some planetary GDP calculations, and one human, because the contract required manual labor support, and humans worked cheap. The human arrived at the shuttle bay carrying a duffel bag that had seen better decades, and a machete that looked like it had been sharpened against every rock between Earth and the Andromeda galaxy. No armor, no neural interface. No crystalline thought amplifiers embedded in the skull for enhanced reaction time. Just boots, practical clothing, and the kind of smile that suggested either supreme confidence or complete ignorance of impending doom. You are the human specialist. Zelthrim's telepathic inquiry carried undertones of profound disappointment. Specialist in manual labor, yeah. The human, whose name was Kade, dropped the duffel with a thud that suggested it contained either rocks or an impressive collection of primitive tools. Heard you needed someone to dig holes and carry equipment. We required someone with opposable thumbs and endurance characteristics. Zelthrim's bioluminescence shifted to doubtful amber. The monetary compensation is acceptable to you. Credits are credits. Let's go look at this death world. The Vrixx crew exchanged telepathic observations that roughly translated to primitive species, limited vocabulary, probably doesn't understand compound interest. They loaded into the shuttle with their 17 cargo containers of survival equipment, while Kade tossed his duffel in the corner and took a nap during the atmospheric descent. Kethan greeted them with the enthusiasm of a carnivorous plant meeting a particularly stupid fly. The landing zone Zelthrim had selected was a clearing approximately 40 meters in diameter, surrounded by jungle that looked like it had been designed by a committee of sadistic botanists and nightmare fuel manufacturers. Trees rose hundreds of meters into the canopy, their bark secreting oils that glowed faintly purple in the fading light. Vines hung like nooses between branches, twitching with movements that suggested they weren't entirely plant-based. The undergrowth pulsed with bioluminescent fungi that released spores in rhythmic patterns, pretty if you ignored how the spores were probably hallucinogenic, toxic, or both. The air smelled like decomposition had married ozone, and they'd honeymooned in a sulfur pit. Atmospheric composition within acceptable parameters, one of the Vrixx technicians announced, their carapace flickering through data readouts. Establishing perimeter shields now, force field generators hummed to life, creating a shimmering dome over the clearing. Equipment containers opened with hydraulic hisses, disgorging enough technology to make a frontier colony jealous. The Vrixx moved with synchronized efficiency, their hivemind coordination allowing them to set up camp with the precision of a choreographed dance. Kade stood at the edge of the clearing, staring into the jungle with the expression of someone reading a familiar book. "You should remain within the protective barrier," Zelthrim advised, his telepathic tone suggesting he was explaining fire safety to a child. "The local fauna becomes aggressive after dark." How aggressive? The previous expedition lost 43% of their personnel to nocturnal predators, hence our enhanced defensive measures. Right, Kade walked back to his duffel and started pulling out items. A hatchet, a coil of rope, a folding shovel that had definitely violated several intergalactic weapons treaties in its lifetime. When's sunset? Local stellar rotation suggests approximately 1.3 standard hours. Better get started then. Zelthrim watched, bioluminescence flickering with confusion, as Kade began hacking at the undergrowth near the clearing's edge. The human moved with methodical efficiency, clearing vegetation in a strip about 3 meters wide that circled the entire camp perimeter. Sweat darkened his shirt. He didn't stop to consult any instruments, didn't activate any technological aids, just swung the machete in rhythm, like he was harvesting wheat instead of alien flora that occasionally bled sap the color of old bruises. "What is the human doing?" one of the younger Vrixx asked telepathically. "Manual labor," Zelthrim replied, though uncertainty colored his thought transmission. "As contracted." The sun set like someone snuffing a candle, plunging Kethan into darkness that the camp's floodlights barely dented. The jungle responded immediately. Bioluminescent patterns erupted across every surface, trees, vines, undergrowth, creating a light show that would have been beautiful if it wasn't accompanied by sounds suggesting every predator within 10 kilometers had just received dinner invitations. Then something in the jungle pulsed. It wasn't light or sound, but something that made reality hiccup. The force field generators stuttered. Floodlights flickered. Half the monitoring equipment emitted warning chirps that escalated into full panic sirens. What's happening? Zelthrim's telepathic broadcast carried edges of actual fear. Unknown energy emission. Electromagnetic pulses cascading through. The technician's report cut off as the main generator sparked and died. The force field collapsed like a soap bubble meeting a shotgun. Darkness rushed in, broken only by emergency chemical lights and the ominous glow of the jungle itself. The Vrixx hivemind connection, so dependent on their technological neural amplifiers, weakened to whispers. 7 million years of evolutionary sophistication met basic infrastructure failure and panicked accordingly. Backup systems. Activate backup systems. Zelthrim's bioluminescence strobed through emergency colors. Kade appeared in the chemical light's glow, carrying an armload of deadfall wood and dried vegetation from his perimeter clearing. He dumped it in a pile, pulled out a knife and a chunk of wood, and started carving. "What are you doing?" Zelthrim demanded. "We need to restore the shields. Shields are fried. Whatever's out there will pulse again if you restart them." Kade's hands moved with practiced speed, shaving a wooden stick into a point, creating a notch in a flat piece of bark. "Gonna need a different approach. We cannot survive without technological protection." "Sure you can." Kade fitted the pointed stick into the notched bark, began spinning it rapidly between his palms. Humans did it for about 200,000 years. Smoke began rising from the friction point. The Vrixx watched with the fascinated horror of civilized beings witnessing controlled barbarism. Kade blew gently on the smoking notch, transferred the ember to a nest of dried moss and grass, and coaxed it into flame with the care of a parent teaching a child to walk. Within minutes, fire crackled in the center of camp. Primitive combustion technology, one Vrixx observed, their telepathic tone mixing disdain with grudging respect. Thermal energy through oxidation. It's called a campfire, Kade said, feeding larger sticks into the growing flames. And we're going to need a lot more of them. He moved to the perimeter he'd cleared, began constructing fires every 10 meters around the camp's edge. The Vrixx, their hivemind connection weakened but functional enough for basic cooperation, helped gather wood with the tentative assistance of people who'd never touched manual labor in their lives. The combustion will deter predators, Zelthrim asked, hauling a branch with 3 of his 6 limbs while the other 3 attempted to maintain some dignity. Most of them. Fire means danger to almost every animal brain that's not human-level stupid. Kade lit the perimeter fires in sequence, creating a ring of flickering light. Predators avoid it instinctively, and anything that doesn't avoid it. He patted the machete at his belt. We'll handle differently. A scream echoed from the jungle, something between a roar and a sob, processed through vocal cords designed by a committee that hated joy. Several Vrixx luminescence patterns flickered to colors that telepathically translated as "I want my mother." What was that? Someone asked. Dinner bell for things that eat, Vrixx-sized snacks. Kade returned to his duffel, pulled out several long branches he'd prepared during his perimeter clearing. Any of you ever used a spear? The subsequent silence spoke volumes. Crash course in pointy sticks then. Kade demonstrated spear construction with the patience of someone who'd taught this lesson before. Select straight branches, roughly 2 meters long. Strip the bark, sharpen one end to a vicious point using the machete, hardening the tip briefly in fire. Create a basic grip by wrapping the other end with cord. Congratulations, you've just manufactured a weapon that humanity had used to conquer every environment from tundra to savanna. The Vrixx attempted replication with varying success. Their bioluminescent carapaces weren't designed for gripping cylindrical objects, meant for stabbing. Their telepathic coordination, so elegant in abstract thought, struggled with the concrete physics of pointy end goes into the predator. No, hold it like this. Kade adjusted a Vrixx's grip for the 4th time. You're not conducting a symphony, you're trying to convince something with teeth that you're more trouble than you're worth. This seems inefficient, the Vrixx observed. A plasma projector would also explode if that EMP pulse hits again. Spear works regardless of your power supply. Something large moved in the darkness beyond the fireline. Eyes reflected the flames. Too many eyes, at the wrong heights, with pupils that suggested complex depth perception used primarily for calculating optimal pouncing angles. Defensive positions, Kade said calmly, like he was organizing a picnic rather than preparing for potential dismemberment. 2 Vrixx per fire station. Spears ready. If something crosses the fireline, stick it, aim for center mass, and for the love of whatever gods you people have, don't close your eyes when you thrust. We should attempt to repair the generators, Zelthrim protested, even as he took position near the eastern fire, with a spear gripped awkwardly in 4 limbs. You want to be elbow deep in circuitry when the next attack comes. Zelthrim's bioluminescence dimmed to sullen blue. No, then we hold until morning. The night proceeded to demonstrate exactly why Kethan 9 held its Class-VII rating. The first creature to test the perimeter looked like someone had taken a panther, added too many legs, and given it a face that violated several Euclidean geometry principles. It prowled the Fireline's edge, luminescent eyes fixed on the Vrixx with the intensity of a gourmand reviewing a menu. "Hold position," Kade instructed, standing near the central fire with machete drawn. "Let it look. Fire's doing its job." The creature paced, circled, tested the psychological barrier. Then something behind it made a sound like tearing metal, and it bolted back into the jungle with the speed of reconsidered decisions. "What scared it?" Vrixx asked telepathically. "Something bigger," Kade replied cheerfully. "Welcome to the food chain." Over the next hours, the perimeter received visitors. A thing with too many mouths. Something that looked like a snake had been crossbred with a bad decision. A creature that existed primarily as teeth with mobility solutions attached. The fires held. The Vrixx, gradually remembering that their species had evolved from predators before ascending to telepathic sophistication, began to understand the basic mathematics of violence. When one overly ambitious hunter tried to leap the fireline, 3 Vrixx spears caught it mid-air. The creature thrashed, shrieked, and retreated with new ventilation holes that had definitely not been part of its original design specifications. "I stabbed it." One Vrixx broadcast telepathically, their bioluminescence flashing colors that suggested primitive triumph. "I stabbed it, and it left." "Outstanding," Kade said, meaning it. "That's called learning." Another pulse rippled from the jungle, the same EMP effect that had killed their technology. The Vrixx's emergency lights flickered and died. Only the fires remained, casting dancing shadows that made every jungle movement look like approaching apocalypse. But they held. Zelthram, standing beside Kade during a lull in attacks, watched the flames with an expression his face wasn't designed for. "Your species survived planetary conditions similar to this." "Earth, yeah, pretty similar. Different predators, same principle." Kade fed more wood into the central fire. "Humans didn't get fancy technology until about 5 minutes ago on the evolutionary clock. Before that, it was fire, pointy sticks, and convincing ourselves we were scarier than the things trying to eat us. And this sufficed. We're here, aren't we? Top of the food chain, spreading across the galaxy, charging you folks credits to dig holes on death worlds." Kade's grin caught the firelight. "Not bad for a species that spent most of its history being something's lunch. Your defensive strategy is predicated on ancient survival methodologies. My defensive strategy is predicated on the fact that fire burns, sharp objects make holes in things, and most predators prefer prey that doesn't fight back. Those facts haven't changed in 1,000,000 years, and won't change in 1,000,000 more." Zelthram's bioluminescence flickered through thoughtful patterns. "We became reliant on technology, on systems that can fail. Technology's great right up until it stops working. Then you better know how to make fire." Kade paused. "That's not metaphorical, by the way. You really better know how to make fire." Dawn arrived with the gradual reluctance of something that suspected Kethan might actually prefer darkness. The jungle's bioluminescence faded. The sounds of nocturnal murder shifted to daytime territorial disputes. Creatures retreated to wherever they contemplated their failures to eat the strange glowing aliens. The Vrixx, exhausted and covered in soot from fire maintenance, stood within their protective ring of ash and conviction. Every one of them still held their spears. Kade walked the perimeter, checking each fire, ensuring the cleared ground remained defensible. The Vrixx watched with new appreciation for manual labor that looked increasingly like survival expertise. We can attempt generator repairs now, Zelthram suggested, though his telepathic tone lacked enthusiasm. Could, Kade agreed. Or we could keep the fires going, establish proper watch rotations, and use your technology for the actual mineral collection instead of basic defense. You propose we continue using primitive methods. I propose you use methods that work. Nothing primitive about staying alive. Zelthram looked at his spear, at the fires, at the cleared perimeter that had kept them breathing through a night that should have been unsurvivable. His bioluminescence cycled through colors that suggested a Vrixx having philosophical realizations. On our world, he said slowly, we have museums displaying our ancestral hunting tools, ceremonial pieces regarded as curiosities from our savage past, maybe less savage than you thought. Perhaps. Zelthram's luminescence settled into thoughtful amber. We called this expedition to demonstrate Vrixx technological superiority in hostile environments. Instead, we learned to build fires and sharpen sticks. And you survived. That's the only metric that actually matters. The expedition continued for another 6 local days. The Vrixx collected their mineral samples using their sophisticated equipment while maintaining their unsophisticated but highly effective defensive perimeter. They learned to maintain fires without technological assistance. They improved their spear technique to levels approaching probably won't stab themselves. They discovered that 7 million years of evolutionary sophistication didn't exempt them from needing to understand how their ancestors had survived before telepathy and force fields. On the final night, as the shuttle prepared for departure, Zelthram stood beside Kade, watching the jungle's bioluminescent awakening. We will include your methodologies in our survival training protocols, Zelthram said. Manual fire creation, primitive weapon construction, defensive perimeter establishment using combustion technology. Call it camping, Kade suggested. Sounds more fun than desperate attempts to not be eaten. Your species does this, recreationally. Some of us. Gets you back to basics, reminds you where you came from. Kade picked up his duffel, considerably lighter, now that he'd distributed most of his equipment to the Vrixx crew. Besides, sometimes the old ways work best. Fire's fire, whether you're on Earth, or Kethan, or some planet that won't be discovered for another 1,000 years. We have a saying, Zelthram said, his bioluminescence flickering with the Vrixx equivalent of wry humor. The most advanced technology is indistinguishable from telepathic consensus. We have a saying too, Kade replied. Don't overthink it. The things trying to eat you won't wait while you calculate optimal defensive configurations. The shuttle lifted off, leaving behind a clearing marked by ash circles and the ghosts of fires that had held the darkness at bay. The jungle reclaimed it within days. Vines, undergrowth, predators resuming their normal routines. But somewhere in Vrixx space, in training facilities and expedition preparation centers, instructors began teaching ancient human survival techniques to species who'd forgotten they were mortal. They learned to make fire without technology. They practiced with spears. They studied the profound simplicity of defensive perimeters built from cleared ground and conviction. The Vrixx published papers on primitive survival methodologies in advanced technological contexts. They hired human consultants to teach courses in manual labor applications for hostile environment survival. They built museums dedicated not to ceremonial hunting tools, but to practical implements that kept you alive when everything else failed. And on Kethan, the night jungle continued not sleeping, filled with predators and pulsars that killed machinery and darkness that cared nothing for species advancement or evolutionary sophistication. But it learned to respect fire. Because fire, as it turned out, was the most egalitarian force in the universe. It burned for whoever knew how to create it, protected whoever knew how to maintain it, and required only the knowledge that humanity had carried across 200,000 years of survival against overwhelming odds. The galaxy had countless species more advanced than humans, more telepathic, more technologically sophisticated, more evolutionarily refined. But when the power died and the night came hunting, they called the species that still remembered how to sharpen sticks and make flames out of friction and stubbornness. They called the humans who'd survived Earth, that other death world, armed with nothing but opposable thumbs, persistence, and the bone-deep knowledge that sometimes the answer to how do we survive this was exactly the same as it had been for the last million years. Build a fire. Sharpen a spear. Hold until morning. Everything else was just commentary.